Hello everyone, my name's Josh Diaz and welcome to the channel. It was a long day today, I had a long shoot and it's been a long week, but I thought to kind of mitigate a little bit of that, we'd do something fun on this channel and just have a fun little tier list. In this video, I'll be ranking every G Master lens in terms of, well, my desire to use it, quality, I suppose, and usability for video applications. So this is ranking the G Master lenses on how good they are for video. Now, just a really quick explanation of what a G Master lens is. It's the premium lens from Sony. This is the upper echelon, the highest of the high, the best lenses that they sell, and of course, they're also very expensive. But you know it's a G Master lens because it comes with that little orange square on the side, and it's a feeling and a look that a lot of photographers and videographers are like. They like the little orange square, especially if they're Sony shooters. So, who am I to be ranking these lenses on a scale of S to F? Well, I'm a long-term Sony shooter. I've been shooting on Sony for 7 years now, and I invested in back in the early A7 III days, and a little before that with the A7S II, and I've built up a arsenal of Sony lenses, and at this point, I can say that I've either owned or used almost all of the G Master lenses in the entire suite professionally. So what I will say is that I've had experience with a lot of these lenses for video applications, and the rankings here are just going to be purely subjective based on my experience with these lenses in my career. And I've had a lot of great experiences with these lenses. So we're going to go through the list, and I'm going to call out the lenses I haven't owned and haven't used. There are some of them, but for the most part, I've owned and used all of these lenses professionally, and I've enjoyed myself while going through them. So we're going to go through the list, and we'll see where they all rank. Spoiler alert, there's really no bad G Master lens. They do make them quite good. They're great quality lenses, but some are better than others. Some are a lot better than others. So just looking to provide some advice and some context as to where I value these lenses in terms of my kit, and this could perhaps help you make the decision when you're shopping for a G Master lens yourself. So I don't know, just a fun little video. Maybe throw it up close to the end of a week, and we'll see how things go. But okay, let's get into it for sure. All right, so what do we have for the first lens? The first lens I have is the Sony 70-200 Mark II. So this is a telephoto zoom lens from Sony, and this is their recently refreshed third in the Holy Trinity series, the 70-200. And what I can say about this lens is I've owned it for about 4 months now, and I absolutely love this lens. I'm a big proponent of the 70-200 in a videographer's bag. I think it offers a lot of versatility, even if people maybe don't think of the longer end as being as applicable for, you know, like interviews and stuff like that, but I'm here to say it completely is. The 70-200 in its current state I use as a B camera lens for a close-up and a 2-camera interview. I think it's great if you need to do like a random headshot here and there, and it's just like if you want to kill a background, if you want to make it really blurry, 200 millimeters at 2.8 will do the job. Other than that, the lens is super light, like ungodly light. And I remember using the autofocus for the first time, and I had to like text a friend because it was so fast. I felt I had to report it to someone. I love this lens. I'm trying to think of any caveats to the lens. There's a number of different buttons and settings on the side. You can customize it to your liking, and the stabe works really well. I don't know. There was a bit of jitters when I first got it. Like I found that it took me a little bit to sync my FX3 with the lens in order to autofocus like I really, really wanted it to. Now that could be a body issue, but the lens itself was like, and still is, blazingly fast. I don't particularly like the hot shoe, or not the hot shoe. I don't particularly like the tripod collar application. On this lens, you gotta like take the foot off, but then like an ugly little hot shoe stays on the lens. Like it's not great, but when comparing this to the other Sony lenses in the lineup, I think, you know, it's a great telephoto. And even when comparing it to the other 70-200s in the Sony E-mount system, killer. This is easily the best one. I love it so much. I'm going to give this one, I mean, we're starting strong. We're starting strong here with an S-tier lens. This is absolutely an S-tier lens. It's got an S-tier price, but we're going to go S-tier. Maybe we'll just put it kind of over there. Very good. Great lens. Next lens we're moving on to is a much older version of that lens, which is the 70-200 Mark I for G Master. Now, I don't remember when this lens came out, but it was one of the first lenses that came out in the G Master system. It wasn't amazing. And I remember renting this lens before acquiring this lens, and then just getting rid of this lens at some point. But let's start stating the basics here. The lens optically was great. It was far superior than the 70-200 f4 at the time, which was your only other option for E-mount, because there were no other third-party lenses when this came out. It was sharp. It autofocused quickly. It was big and heavy, but it had a really unique lens hood with the pedal design, and like perfectly serviceable for a professional video application. I thought the continuous autofocus was great. The anti-reflective coatings were good. They held contrast really well. Really the downfall for this lens was in the back focusing. It really struggled with back focusing, and it really struggled shooting into the sunlight or shooting into bright lights and trying to focus on a subject in shadow. It really hunted in the shadows, and on top of that, it weighed a ton. Like, it was a heavy lens, and rightfully so. There's a ton of glass in there, but the combination of weight and not always as reliable, at least in my experience, for video applications in the focusing, made this lens a tough one to recommend, even at its price, which was a top tier price. It was cheaper than the Mark II version, but the Mark II is just far and away such a better lens. In my opinion, I don't think anyone should buy this lens, even if it's on the market for a brand new price. I think you should go for the Mark II. Maybe on a sale, this lens could be good, but you are living with some caveats. They might have improved them in a software update down the line. I'm not sure. I haven't used this lens in over 3 years now, I would say. But in my opinion, this lens was very mid in terms of its performance. So I'm gonna put this lens right about. I think I might give it a C. I'm gonna put it in the C column. We'll see if it lives there for a while. Crazy how two very similar lenses can be so far apart. Okay, so we're moving on to the next lens, and that's the 24-70 Mark I. Another one of so the Holy Trinity line for the G Masters was a good start to that ecosystem. Like, it was tough, right? Because they had to compete with the Holy Trinities from Nikon and Canon and their ecosystems, which were so much more mature than Sony's offerings when it came out for full frame E-mount, and it showed. So the 24-70 again was a good lens, but it didn't offer the same value as Canon or Nikon systems. Like, if you were shooting on their systems, first of all, the lenses were more expensive, and second, they had like quirks, like they like this lens in particular. Like, I love the 24-70 as a focal length, and this lens was sharp, it was accurate, it was easy enough to use, but it carried forward a lot of the weird idiosyncrasies of that initial line, and the fact that it was heavy. And this one in particular, I had issues with ghosting and lack of contrast. I had weird flares. Like, it just didn't seem like it had the same fine precision control that maybe some of the legacy brands were offering at the time. So I noticed that as a nitpick coming from Canon, especially. I love their Mark II 24-70 on EF. I shot on it for a long time before I got to this lens in the Sony system, and I thought it was a step backwards using the Sony lens. Not an autofocus. Focus was great, very sharp lens, but just the creature comforts of using the 24-70 Mark I weren't necessarily there, but it was still a good lens, great all-rounder. Loved shooting events with it. It's pretty good. So I'm going to put it in the B column. Let's just line them up right here. Very good. The next lens on the list is the 24-70 Mark II, and full transparency, haven't used this lens. This is one of those lenses I haven't used because I actually got rid of my 24-70 GM Mark I and picked up a 24-70 Sigma. And I've been shooting on the Sigma happily since then. So I haven't had a need to pick up this new lens yet. But having seen the reviews and having known people who have shot on it locally, professionally, I've heard great things about it. So I've heard it's lighter. I heard the coatings are better. I mean, they produced it years and years after this new iteration, and I've heard nothing but positive praise from it. So I'm willing to assume in this list that it is a step up above that Mark I, and it is a quality 24-70, which is essential in any camera system. It's such a versatile focal length. So I think I'm just going to give it a step up here based on my anecdotal evidence from my peers and put it in the A column. Let's go. Next lens we have here is a lens that's lived in my kit for a long time. It's the Sony 85-1.4. This is the big and beautiful portrait lens. It's also one of the oldest lenses It's also one of the lenses. It's also one of the oldest lenses in the Sony E-mount system. This thing is ancient. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this came out in 2013. Like, no joke. And I've had mine for years. So what can I say about this lens? It is everything you think it would be in a giant portrait lens. It's massive. And like, if you've ever seen it, like, it comes off the mount and just expands, and it's heavy, and you can tell there's a lot of glass in it. And the images it produces is good. The images it produces is great. Like, it produces great images. You get a 1.4 on 85. That's buttery bokeh. I think the flares and the coatings on this lenses are great. Like, I've used it successfully for interviews for a long time, but what I found later down the line is that I started using my 70-200 more for the B cam stuff as opposed to the 85, and I'm going to tell you why. Is that the 85 focuses, the focus noise that comes off this lens is atrocious. When I bought this lens secondhand, and I got it secondhand from B&H, like after they had checked it out and everything was good, my copy was good. When I got this lens from B&H secondhand and I used the continuous focus on it, I thought someone was grinding a gear. Like, I thought something was wrong because it was so audible, and beyond that, it was so slow. And you can really tell that Sony's using the older focus system and they're moving a lot of glass. Like, this is basically worst case scenario, is that this lens, not only is it using an inferior focus system, is it's moving essentially the most amount of glass you have to move in a lens, in a prime, apart from like the super sport lenses. So this lens, I love the look of an 85-1.4. I hate this lens. I hate this lens with a passion because I want to love it, and the finishes on the outside of the lens and the body of the lens, it's so nice, but then the execution of the technical stuff, the and the way it works, and just how its ease of use, I've always really detested this lens. And anyone who's like, I want an 85 on the E-mount system, I'm like, get the 1.8 or wait for the Mark II. Don't buy this lens, or get the Sigma, but you know, if you want to stay in Sony. So I don't like this lens. Christ. I want to put it in C, but the more I talk about it, I think it's a D lens. Like, you're gonna get great images out of it, but I hate it. I hate this lens. That being said, I own it, and it follows me everywhere I go. So we'll take what you will with that. Okay, so the next lens we move on to is, the most unique lens in the entire GM system, and that's the 100mm STM. The 100mm STM is a really unique lens. I've never owned it, but I've had the chance to use it before, and what I can say is using it is unlike any other G Master lens. And you might not even have known that there was a 100mm in the G Master line because it's not a regular lens and nobody really talks about it. It's a smooth trans lens, or STM. And what that does is, I guess for lack of better words, it just kind of smears all the bokeh in the background. So you don't get bokeh balls traditionally. You get this more painterly, kind of blurred together Gaussian effect that comes up behind your image. And it's certainly a taste, like it's certainly subjectively something someone wants and someone would want. And other than that, the lens performs adequately, and I like the lens as a G Master lens, but I don't necessarily understand why it goes in the system as a G Master lens, if that makes sense. Like it's a good quality lens that's built up to the G Master spec, in my opinion, but it's the only STM, and it's a weird deviation from some of the other lenses on the list because it's so a-traditional. So I don't really have too much to say about this, other than my applications using it for video are very limited. Even if I were to have easier access to it than just going to a rental house, like, it's tough, right? Because if you have a G Master kit, it's not going to match with any of your other lenses. The bokeh is going to look really different. Like, it's really all or nothing. You got to use this lens for a project and this lens only. And because of that, I think it presents itself as a lens with a lot of restrictions. That being said, you have a lot of creative opportunity to make something unique based on this lens's physical characteristics. But it's not for me. Ultimately, that's why I have never bought it. I've never really looked at it seriously other than just some one-off projects. So I'm going to put it in the D category, but that's not a mark on it's a bad lens, like the 85. That's a mark on it's just not very versatile as a lens, in my opinion. So I'm going to keep it in the D column. And let's move on to the next one. So the next one is the Sony 100-400. And here, admittance time, another lens I haven't used. So I haven't used this because I'm a diehard 70 to 200, and when I need more, I just throw on the teleconverter, and that's it. And that's been the way it's been for me for a long time, is like keeping the bag small and keeping all my gear concise. A teleconverter is a lot smaller than two lenses, and when your 100 to 400 does not go down to a 2.8, like it's a variable aperture all the way up to 5.6, it's just two different use cases, right? And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I really like a 70 to 200 2.8 for its versatility in interview settings and occasional headshots, where a 100 to 400 could be like way better for someone who shoots sports or, I don't know, wildlife, or maybe you need to do some type of event work where you're standing farther back. Like, there's tons of applications, and I don't knock anyone who uses the 100 to 400. I've seen it, people use it, I've talked to owners of it, no real bad reviews. I've heard great performance out of it, and obviously a very useful focal range. That being said, it's not necessarily for me, but it could be for someone who's looking for more of a versatility out of a longer focal length. Like, ultimately, you'll know, right? Do you stand farther away from your subjects than you might with the 70-200? Get the 100 to 400. Great lens. Not necessarily for me, but to each their own. So I think it's going to come middling for me. I don't think it's as versatile as a 70-200 in the way that I like to use these lenses. That being said, it's still a great lens. I'm going to put it high B. I'm going to put it high B. There we go. All right, the next lens on the list is the Sony 16-35 Mark I. So finally we're wrapping up the initial Holy Trinity, the three trio of 2.8 zoom lenses, and this is the 16-35. Now, I never owned this lens, but I used to rent this lens religiously. I don't know why, looking back, I didn't buy it. I remember really eyeing up the 12-24 Sigma 2.8, thinking, oh, I'm going to save a bit of money, but I just never bought a ultra wide, like just a wide like this. And I think it's just because while I was excited to use them for certain projects, I never really noticed the demand for 16 millimeters. And whenever it was like, oh, I need a 35 or 24, I went prime. So excellent lens. I really like the 16-35. In my opinion, it's the best of the old Sony Trinity, the Mark I, and still a very useful, very versatile lens. The zoom was really short throw on that one, which made it easy to use on a gimbal because it didn't throw off balancing. 16 millimeters, if you've never tried it, is really cool. Like, I really love 16 millimeter look, like the super wide look, and then to push into a 35, which is like a super awesome. You can even do portraits with 35, or like what I used to do is I used to do run and gun event work and like travel docs essentially, where we would go around and film stuff in people's homes and outside, and you never really knew what you were filming with that system. So to have something in a 16 that could get you a whole room, and then in a 35 that you could potentially shoot a run and gun interview with, awesome for me. And I really like the 16-35. It was a bit heavier than modern lenses. You can kind of tell now it's a bit old in the teeth, and there was some weird idiosyncratic stuff with it that I didn't like. It had a bit of quirkiness from the old line with its focus and its coatings, but not as much as the 70-200 did, or the 24-70. And I think this lens holds up a little better than those in the long run and in retrospective. So I really like this lens, and I'm going to put it higher than the 100-400, but I mean, there's such different lenses, you can barely even compare them. I think I'm going to put it low A. All right, now we get into its, I was going to say its older brother, but this lens is a lot newer. Its younger sibling? No, we get into its successor, which is the 16-35 Mark II GM lens. So 16-35 2.8, succeeding the Mark I. And I love this lens. I think it's obvious, right? Like, if I like the Mark I love the Mark II. The Mark II just adds all those extra little creature comforts. It makes the lens less quirky and way more, I don't know. It's not a lot of improvement. The lens is a bit lighter, focus is a bit faster, it's a bit smaller, and it's got an aperture ring and like just little things, right? But it really rounds out the package, and you'd be surprised at how much your confidence as a videographer and a shooter improves when you have some extra tools to kind of really refine your work. Like, if you really needed that aperture ring, well, now we have it. Or if you were really looking at min-maxing your bag and saving weight, or maybe you need to do a lot of airport checks and like this lens is smaller, like, it's just, it's just a good lens. And I think the way they were able to improve these lenses is awesome. And the fact that they were able to take this trinity and squish them down, make them smaller, yet way more, high performing in their own rights, I think is awesome. So I really like this lens. I don't own one. I'm looking to purchase one soon, hopefully, but I've been renting one incessantly from my local house, and I think it's just excellent. If I had one complaint about this lens, I would say that I hate the focus ring. The focus ring is so soft, and it's so plasticky. It's just, it's built right, but it's just, you never really get any physical feedback from these focus rings. Maybe not the same as you would with like a Sigma lens or something a bit more tankier. That would be my complaint. But other than that, excellent lens that produces some high quality images. Oh, where should I put it? It's definitely up here. You know what? I think it's better than the old, and it's better than, yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to put it low S. We got low S tier. It really is. It's really good. And I think you're going to see a pattern here with some of these zooms is like they're really versatile for video. Speaking of versatile zooms, which are great for video, we have a 400 millimeter. Damn. So we have a 400 millimeter. We have a 400 millimeter prime. This is a 400 millimeter 2.8, and we've entered the silly mode. We've entered the silly area of the tier list where this lens is crazy, right? It's a 400 millimeter 2.8 costing $10,000, give or take. It's a 400 millimeter 2.8 costing twice as much as the other G Master lenses. I'm not sure how much this lens costs off the top of my head, but I know it's crazy expensive because it's a specialized lens, right? Most people aren't buying this lens. The people who are buying this lens are pro sports photographers, wildlife photographers, or people renting it with very specific applications for a very specific prime, and that's what it is. Surprise, surprise, I've never actually used this lens before. I've talked to people, and I've spoken to people who have used it and use it for local sports, and like it's crazy big, I'll give you that. It'd be really hard to put a focus ring on this or a follow focus system or even rig this out with a matte box or anything. It's not for video. That being said, you could use it for video if you wanted to. I'm sure it takes great video, but it's not for the average videographer, the average video producer. So tough to rate this lens because it's clearly a high performer. It's in the upper echelon of what Sony sells, but I don't think I can seriously rate it against these other lenses. And in the versatility area, I just think it falls really flat because you can really only use it for one type of shot. And that's it. I don't know. Again, if you guys have any different opinions, please leave them down in the comments because I really don't know where to put this lens. So I wish there was another area, but like a special area here, S for special. But I'm going to have to throw it in the D column because it's not a video lens in the same way that these are. Okay, guys, we're moving on to the Sony 24mm f1.4. This lens is really special. I like this lens. I think it came out in 2016, and I bought it within a year. And the reason I bought it was because it got such good fanfare online. Like, when it came out, everyone was praising it. It was light, it was compact, and it was super fast for a 24. And it presented like this well-rounded package for the E-mount system that was one of the lowest priced G Master lenses to get into. Not to mention the 24 being a super friendly like YouTuber and vlogger lens because of how wide it was, but yet, minimizing distortion. Also, it came with the aperture ring, which in 2016 was a relatively new concept for G Master lenses, so it was kind of cutting edge in that way. Manageable filter threads, like it really was just everything. And I really like this lens because it challenges me to shoot different things. I don't typically shoot on a 24 prime, but having one, and I do own one, makes me think, how am I going to use my 24 prime today? Like what shot can I use that for? And 24 millimeters at 1.4 is a really interesting look. Like the fall off is really quick, but then you get a bit of that distortion, especially if you're doing close-up work where the subject's face, just the face is in frame. It's just really interesting and also like kind of flattering for a 24, I don't know. I really like this as a prime, and we're going to go into some of the smaller primes here, and you're going to notice a pattern here, is that I really like the primes that the G Master series produces, and I think the 24 being one of like the initial really good primes in this system just sticks with me. I really like this lens, and I would recommend it to a lot of people. So I think, oh my God, I'm going S. I think I'm going S. You know, okay. Do I put it in front of the 35, the 16 to 35? The 16 to 35, obviously more versatile. You get the full zoom range. You don't get the speed, but you get like a pretty similar size now. They brought down the 35, but the price of the 16 to 35 is twice as much, essentially, as the 24 to 1.4. So you know what? It's my list, right? I think I'm going to put the 24-1.4 ahead of the 16 to 35. I know that's crazy and it doesn't make any sense, but I really like this lens, and it's a fun lens to use. If you're getting into the G Master system with full frame E-mount, I'd recommend you look at this lens if that's something, that wide look is something that you're interested in. It's really cool and easy to stabilize because it's wide and you get, you know, less motion than on some of those telephotos. I could go on and on. I could go on and on and talk positively about this lens, but we got to move on to the next lens on the list, which is polar opposite. So we're going 135. So this is the G Master 135 f1.8, and it fights for that telephoto spot in your bag across from the 85-1.4. Now, a lot of people, you know, when they ask me what portrait lens, what telephoto portrait do you recommend for the Sony E-mount system? Do you want an 85-1.4 or do you want a 135-1.8? And if it's just those two lenses, I'd say get the 135 every time. The 135 is the better lens. It's newer, it's more versatile. Well, it's not more versatile, but it's newer. It comes with, I was going to say it comes with the aperture ring, but they both come with the aperture ring. What am I trying to say? It doesn't have the super clunky focus that the 85 does. The 85 focus sucks. It's loud, it's slow. I hate it. But the 135 is better. Like, it's a more modern, more useful lens. And, you know, honestly, the bokeh, very comparable. Like 85 1.4 to 135 1.8, you get a little more sharpness, you know, in focus with the 1.8, but you get more compression. You got to stand farther away. I like the 135 personally. I think they're pretty interchangeable, depending on like the price of the lens at that point. But if you're looking at these two lenses, the 135 I think wins out in basically every scenario, and they're very similarly priced. So I like the 135 for portraits and second cam work. I would put it ahead of the 85-1.4 because it's a better lens, but it's not, you know, it's not like the greatest. Like, I'd still like to have a 70-200 2.8 ahead of this. You know, there's some other lenses that are coming up that I'd like to have instead of this. So I think it's a solid B contender. Put it in the B category, B for 135. All right, we're going to the next lens. Okay, so one more jokester lens here. The goddamn 600mm f4. Same spiel as the 400. This lens is awesome. It's like, objectively, as Sony shooters, every single one of us would love to have this lens. I'd love to own this lens. I'd love to use this lens for something. I've never used this lens. I know people who have used this lens. I don't actually know anyone who owns this lens because it's over $10,000. But I've seen people who work in sports, and I know people who work in sports where the outlet owns the lens and they use it. And it's a fantastic lens for getting fantastic images with essentially no background. Just destroy the background, obliterate it, turn it into absolute mush. You see that picture of a bird on the branch, destroy the mountains and the forest behind it. That's what this lens does. It absolutely obliterates backgrounds with compression and blur, and it's a super cool look, but it's essentially non-viable for my type of video applications. I mean, I'm sure you could get good video with it. I'm not actually even sure what the features are of this lens, like if it comes with Stabe, or, you know, can you imagine putting a teleconverter on this and making it 1200? Oh my god, that would be crazy. It'd probably just snap at the mount. The E-mount is not like the most robust mount out there. Can you imagine putting this on the end of your FX3 or what have you, and then mounting the FX3 on the tripod from the FX3 like on the body? Oh my god. This lens is silly, expensive, excessive. That being said, if you own it or you use it, you know who you are, and it's perfectly applicable to you. For many use cases, this and the 400 are S, because the people who need them need this specific lens, and there really is no substitute. But for myself and the people who Don't need them. They live down here in the D column. So you know what? I'm just going to take these 2 telephotos and I'm going to put them way back here because, you know, for me, they're just not, they're not what I would use them. I really would, but I can't book a gig with these things and I can't buy them. They're so expensive. So let's move on. Next, we have one of the newest lenses in the Sony G Master lineup. We have the Sony 12-24 ultra wide zoom. What a unique lens. Like, when this came out, I was so intrigued. I was just so interested. I was like, damn, like what is Sony up to? They already have the GM trio, 16-35, the 24-70, and the 70-200. That's typically what a traditional camera maker makes, and then everything else is extraneous, and you don't really see this ultra wide stuff apart from the third party. Like Sigma has their own 12-24, but that's because they needed to make something that competed with the 16-35, and they wanted to do a Sigma thing and make it a little different. I get that. But for Sony to make that different thing, that's just really unique. Now, that being said, I've never used this lens. I mean, it basically just came out a few months ago. But I've had the chance to put it on a camera and test it out at a local photography shop, and really unique. First of all, it's one of the only Sony lenses that you can't actually put a filter on the front of because of the bulbous front element that helps you achieve that super wide angle. And it's crazy, right? Because, you know, you don't have to do that with a 16-35, but you have to do that for that extra 4 millimeters. It just gets way wider on that wide end. And you'd think the 12-24 is restrictive, but when you're getting that wide with a 12 millimeter, it actually is quite substantial. You do get a lot wider. Now, this lens is primarily positioned towards landscapes, maybe some astral photography, like, you know, proper wide angle subject matter. So as a result, apart from a creative shot here or there, as a videographer and a video shooter, I don't typically have a lot of applications for a lens of this nature. That being said, I've used ultra wides before, and, you know, they can create some really interesting imagery. Now, I need to ask, is that imagery worth the expensive price tag that this lens commands? I think beyond those telephotos, those highly specialized telephotos, this might be the most expensive GM lens in the entire lineup, commanding a price of almost $4,000 Canadian. So, not for me at that price range, especially because there is a 12-24 in the Sigma. I mean, might as well just go for that. But the people who use this, again, you know who you are. You're pro landscape photographers. You're not wildlife. You're pro wide angle subject matter experts. And the images that I've seen out of this lens are intensely sharp, great Sunstar work. You know, you can do astro, and like obviously you're getting a lot of value for that money. You're getting a lot of performance, but it's certainly not for everyone. In fact, it's not for a lot of people. So I like this lens in concept. I wish it was cheaper, and I wish it had, I mean, if it was cheaper, I could think of more video use cases for it. But as a result, it's a niche lens. It's not as niche as those super telephotos, but it is still pretty niche for video. So I'm going to put it in the C. Yeah, C, late C here. Let's get that all straightened out. Next, we have the Sony 35mm 1.4, and another like pretty recent lens. Like I think this came out 2 years ago or something like that. And yeah, I love these tiny little primes from Sony in their G Master category. I don't know how long ago it was, but there was a point in time where I was just like, yep, got to get the 35, got to get the 50. Like I got to get all the small ones. I already had the 24. I got to get them all so I could kind of just have the set and make use of them when I needed them. And do I regret getting the 35? Absolutely not. So I came from the 35-1.8, which is a fan favorite amongst Sony shooters. If you were to ask me, like, what are the secret gems in the Sony lineup for full frame lenses, I would say the 35-1.8 and the 85-1.8. Those are absolute gems because they perform way better than they have any right to, and they're cheap too. They're comparatively to these G Masters, they're cheap. So if you're looking for cheap workhorse lenses, I'd probably look at those for primes. That being said, you get an extra bit of light with the 1.4 as opposed to the 1.8. So that helps a lot in low light situations. And you kind of do a bit of a trade-off too. So I think the trade-off works in the GM's favor. I mean, you get a light lens that's better built than that 35-1.8. My big complaint with the 35-1.8 is that it didn't look like a Sony lens. It was tiny. I think it had like a 58mm front filter thread. It looked, dare I say, it did not look professional. But this lens it's a little bigger. It bumps up to that 62 filter thread. It's got the GM construction, which we all like. It's got the aperture ring, and in theory, it's got better coatings and it performs better optically, which I've seen in the sharpness. That being said, it's well known that the 35-1.4 has more focus breathing than the 35-1.8. Now, I shoot on an FX3 primarily, so the focus breathing compensation completely cancels that out. I get a bit of a crop, but that's fine. So I don't notice it as much as someone who doesn't have those features. That could be a big issue, but the trade-offs for me, there are reasons to go for that 35-1.8, and dare I say, 35-1.8 is a better value. But the 35-1.4, if you're looking for high performance in a 35, I think the 35 is a good focal length. I don't think it's like a goated focal length. It's tough. When I use the 35, I'm always questioning whether or not I should be on a 50 or a 24. But the 35 is a lens. I think it's good. I think it's actually like a staple of professional prime work, so I'm going to put it in the A. Next on the list, and rounding out the last three here, with the Sony 50mm f1.2, another relatively recent lens. This lens is awesome, and for a long time, people were questioning whether or not Sony could even make a 1.2, because the E-mount as a mount, like as a system, is one of the smallest camera mounts in the lot, because Nikon and Canon created their mounts a lot later on the mirrorless system, and they were able to make them bigger. So just like, online there was some debate on whether or not an f1.2 was even possible for Sony, because typically the 1.2 is released pretty early on in a camera's life cycle. It's kind of a staple to show like what the system can do. Like, it's a performance benchmark. A lot of camera makers, they make the 1.2 to kind of like brag about, like, look what we can do. And that Sony shooters, we waited a long time for that, but it finally came. And there's some trade-offs. It's a heavy lens, primarily. It's pretty heavy, but it's a stunner. It performs excellently. I love this lens. I don't own this lens, but I've rented it multiple times, and the fall off for photography is just great. Video shooters too, you get a really unique look with this lens, like really unique. And a lot of it is like ethereal, atmospheric. Like when you have just such a small plane of focus, you can really do some interesting stuff in terms of your visuals, especially if you have light coming in, in different ways. You can really use that shallow depth of focus along with some pretty strong NDs to create some really unique looks. So I like this lens. It's not for everyone, primarily because of the lens that's coming after it, and we're going to talk about that. But this lens is one of the flagships of the G Master system in terms of sheer performance, like rock solid lens. And I really like this lens. I don't think it's like the greatest value for a 1.2, but it's certainly up there. It's a high quality lens, and I don't think anyone who's purchased one has ever regretted buying one, because they are very good. So I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it high A, move the rest of these down. And now we move on to our second last lens in the Sony G Master E-mount system, and that's the 50mm 1.4. And all I can say is rip 50mm 1.2. No, I love this lens. I own this lens. I bought it when it came out, and it's awesome. It's essentially the 1.2, half the weight, half the price, and only a tiny little loss of light, and that's it. Review over. That's basically it. I feel bad for the 1.2. I mean, the 1.2 is better. It performs better. It's got better contrast retention. It's got more stops of light. It's a more professional lens that will hold its value and is like a staple of, like, if you want the best of the best, that's the lens. But we live in a real practical world with trade-offs and consequences for your actions. And the consequence of going with the 1.2 is that you're like 1,600 Canadian less rich. No, speaking professionally, the 1.4 is a workhorse. It's a great lens. I use it in my kit with all the other primes, and it's perfect in there. I don't notice the focus breathing, even with the focus breathing compensation off. It's got a super unique look. In fact, we're shooting on the 50mm 1.4 right now. It's just like a solid lens that gets the job done in the 50mm focal length. Now, you could say what you want about the 50mm focal length, how it's, might as well shoot on a telephoto or a wide, like it's kind of stuck in the middle. But if you want that accurate reproduction in the 50mm space, this is the lens I'd recommend. Like, don't get the 51.8. It's trash. I've owned that one too, and like that's a really bad lens. And unless you are willing to break the bank, with the 1.2, just settle with 1.4. It's reasonably priced in terms of G Master lenses, and it delivers great performance that you can rely on time and time again. It's a goated lens, and now that I talk about it more, you know what? I think it was gonna. Is it S? Is it S? No, I don't think it's S. I think it might be A. Let's move on. It's high A. It is the A-est of the A. I really like it, and I think the only thing holding it back is my apprehension to the focal length being not as versatile as some of the others. So let's just sort all these, get them going for the last one, and we have our last G Master lens here, and what is it? Last G Master lens is, again, one of the newest G Master lenses. It's the Sony 14mm 1.8. So the Sony 14mm 1.8 represents another really interesting lens for Sony, right? Because like, they're not the upstart mirrorless brand that I grew up with them being, and that like I've known them as. They're now a more established camera company. Like, they've been making these lenses for over 10 years now, and as a result, they have really good quality zooms in their holy trinity. They've made some really good primes. Like, they don't necessarily have to make the staples anymore, so they can focus on the more unique lenses and the fringe applications of these G Master lenses, and that's kind of what I would consider the 14 to be. It is like a requested lens from photographers. Like people do want a 14 that's really fast, and Sony delivered on that. I've used this lens in rentals, but I've never owned this lens, and even like the one time I used it, it wasn't for very long. So I can't form a super accurate opinion about this based on my really short use case for it, but what I can say is that people who need a wide will be very happy. Astrophotographers are absolutely overjoyed for this lens because of its fast optics. And then the 14 is like just a really useful wide angle focal length for people who want to capture a big frame. Like, that's basically it. It's the widest prime on the G Master system, and it carries forward all of the same upgrades that the other primes do. So you got the aperture ring, you've got the optional map button, and just like the small compact utilitarian size that some of these later primes have adopted. And I think it's great that they're all kind of the same size. They're all kind of the same weight. Like what Sony's done with the primes, especially these later primes, is really standardize them in a way that you'd almost see on cinema glass, where they're all pretty much the same. So you can kind of get away with, like, a lot of these you can get away with using the same 62mm filter adapter through all the primes. And that's really helpful for photographers because you're not fussing with adapters and, different lens cases and stuff like that. Like, it's helpful when everything's kind of the same size and when that size is small. And that's what the 14 is. It's a small, versatile, well, it's not versatile. It's a small, like, useful lens for people who need the 14, and surprisingly good and reasonably priced, under 2,000 Canadian. So I really like this lens. That being said, for video applications, 14 is pretty restrictive. You're looking at a very stylized approach to most of your shots, and like at that point, you might as well just get the 16 to 35 because then you could use it for the 35 when you need it. Or the 24. I love the 24, and the 24 is still reasonable in its distortion to where you can get away with like not having a super stylized image. The 14, not so much. The 14 is a very specialized lens, but reasonably priced and reasonably featured. So I'm going to put it... Unfortunately, I think it is a C lens. That being said, great lens, good quality, just not as versatile as some of the other options. But it's high C. I'm going to put it in the high C. Well, and so there you have it. We've gone through all the Sony G Master lenses and ranked them in a tier list from S to F. Big surprise, there's no F lenses. Sony makes great glass in their G Master lineup, even going back to their initial lenses all the way back in the early 2010s. But it was fun to review them all, and I don't know, just as someone who's owned 80% of these lenses, give or take, I've been happy with my purchases. Like, I think I've gotten a lot of my professional career out of the G Master glass, and even though it is marketed primarily as photography glass, the video applications are exceptional. The continuous autofocus and the excellent optics that come off these lenses, not to mention, in the newer glass, the portability, the lightweight, and the ability to travel with this stuff is second to none. I mean, if you're a Sony shooter, G Master glass should be a no-brainer for your next project if you can afford it. If you can't, no worries, because there's so many good options out there. And looking back with some of the options from Sigma and Tamron and the other brands that make for the E-mount space, I think that there have been major opportunities for me to save money too, looking back, getting some of those other lenses. So I think that it's never been a better time to be a video shooter, given all of the updates in technology and all of the innovations and different changes to price points. Like, you can get an accessible, awesome 4K 10-bit camera for super cheap now, or relatively cheap, and that never used to be the case. It's never been a better time to be a video shooter, creator, content creator. And just speaking on this brand, it's never been a better time to shoot for Sony, because you have never had more options in terms of what you're buying to get a tool to create exactly what you want to create. And I think that's what we've put on display here, is that there's a lot of tools that you can use to create what you want to create, but ultimately you got to decide what's going to work best for you in your application. That being said, this is the list of the lenses that I have gone over. All the G Master lenses. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 G Master lenses. This is where I would put them. Let me know your comments down below if I made any huge mistakes or if I'm overlooking any critical features. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head here based off of my own experience, but I think I'm pretty confident in my order. Let's see what you guys think down in the comments below. I read every single one, so make sure if you leave a comment, I'll try my best to get back to you. I really appreciate you watching the video, and I thank you very much, and I'll see you very soon.